Dark Souls 3, the finale, the final Souls game. Dark Souls 1 and 2 were such a hit that obviously Bandai wanted another sequel out of From Software after Dark Souls 2's mixed public reception. It was time for the Souls series to redeem itself and return to form. Dark Souls 2 was a mess of a Souls game, and judging by my previous video, you guys must have thought I hated the game. I didn't, but I felt there was a lot to be desired. Dark Souls 2 is very polarizing across the entire fanbase, and a lot of people didn't find Dark Souls 2 to be as good as the first game when it came to combat, level design, or whatever. But when Bloodborne came out, PlayStation players got something that would be acclaimed fairly well, and received better than Dark Souls 2. But once FromSoft traded from Sony back to Bandai, work began on a new Dark Souls game. Case in point, Dark Souls 3. But they learned from Bloodborne and decided to make a Souls game that would be similar to their new IP. Now, I haven't played Bloodborne up to this point, but I really want to. It looks like my cup of tea. I will eventually get a PlayStation 4, and if the PS5 rumors about backwards compatibility are true, then I will buy a PlayStation 5 for Bloodborne and future console games. But enough about that. Dark Souls 3 was received insanely well, but even that is an understatement. Dark Souls 3 is often considered the best Souls game, and I agree with them. But why? Well, I'll talk about that a bit later, but just to recap my previous videos, let's do this. Dark Souls 1 is one of the greatest games ever made, but not without its flaws. Dark Souls had a great first half, but the second half was subpar and had some frustrating design. Dark Souls 1 had some weird issues with movement, and combat felt a little too slow with the use of shields. Dark Souls 2 fixed some of the problems with the first game, but not without a whole heap of problems following that. Dark Souls 2 had omnidirectional rolling, but the movement limited to 8 directions, and that was clunky and not good to control. Dark Souls 2 felt lighter, and everything felt like butter. Dark Souls 2 had too many humanoid bosses that were often copy and pasted. Dark Souls 2 was such a step down from the first game, even though I enjoyed it. But even though these games had flaws, I still enjoyed them. For the most part anyways. But Dark Souls 3 was a game that aimed to fix the problems with both DS1 and DS2. So in this video, the game will be covered in more or less the same way as before. Did they succeed? Well, yes and no. Let's dig straight into Dark Souls 3. The story is as such, very minimalistic, enormous amounts of lore, the basic shit, but this time we have the same 4 Lord Souls concept as Dark Souls 1, showing us Aldrich, the Devourer of Gods, Farron's Abyss Watchers, Yorm the Giant, and Prince Lothric and Prince Lorien. The opening cutscene does a much better job at establishing the world than Dark Souls, but your motivation for doing the things you're doing is once again kept very vague, unlike Dark Souls 2. When you spawn into this world, your character is just kind of plopped in with no organic flow. No undead coming to Drang Lake to break the curse, and no chosen undead to escape the undead asylum and pilgrimage to Lordran. You're just kind of thrown into the land of Lothric with no real flow. You aren't really given a goal at the start of the game, no bells of awakening, no motivation to collect the Lord Souls, just seemingly nothing. No characters set any goals for you to achieve. People just kind of sit at the hub area doing nothing but their tasks. Nobody in the world is like Oscar, who wanted to save Lordran. Nobody in Lothric really cares about the world, which is a shame because Lothric just seems a lot more fucked up than Lordran. The whole world has been taken over by the dark forces that inhabit the world currently, giving the world a lifeless feeling. A land covered in ash. Lothric is almost very fucked, and everybody just seems accepting of the dying world they inhabit, which is very depressing. Not many people like Solar or Siegmeyer exist. Siegward is an optimistic character, but running into him just seemed to happen a lot less often. He was harder to find, and his dialogue when I did find him wasn't that interesting. There aren't any characters like the Crestfallen Warrior anymore. While it was cool to see Patches again, but I could never find him again. But I guess that's all the more relevant since Lothric is a dying world. Everybody seems hollowing in this world, and the few that haven't hollowed yet are on the fast track to hollowing. The only memorable characters for me is the Firekeeper. The only reason I was even talking to her was to level up, but she is the definition of static, so I take back my saying that she was interesting. These characters are really boring. I'm surprised the old lady from Dark Souls 2 made a return as a merchant, and Andre the Blacksmith made a return as well, but this just seems like blind fan service. I'm sorry, I don't have too much to say about the game's story. I don't really want to spend too much time on the lore anyway, since I don't know much about it. A lot of people don't like the desaturated look of Dark Souls 3, which confuses me considering people don't understand that this game is the finale, and that the world is fucking ending. They complain that the world isn't as colorful as, say, Lordran or Drang Lake. I love the aesthetic of Lothric. Everything seems to be dying. Everything is just covered in ash, and that makes things more sad and depressing. Places like the Cathedral of the Deep are gorgeous. They're so large, but they feel so hopeless, with hollows taken over. What was once a religious sanctuary is now a wasteland of death and horrors. Even beautiful areas like Irithyll, the Boreal Valley, seem to be dying in some sense, despite the shiny feeling of everything that seems to have there. This area is fucking gorgeous, though, for many different reasons. For one reason, the area has a pleasing visual identity. The dark night sky with the light of the moon illuminating everything, the many spirits walking around, and the enemies that will shred you to pieces. Other areas like the Undead Settlement are littered with corpses, and fires that are burning with corpses as their fuel. These places are filled with so many nasty looking creatures. You can really sense the weight of these ruined locations. It was definitely the right feel to go for in this game. About halfway through the game, areas like Lothric Castle and the areas surrounding it goes through a pretty cool change. The sky turns orange, and the black hole sun can be seen in the sky. The world shines, just not through its beauty, but the little details like the solar eclipse can convey so many emotions. The fact that it never goes away. Even the hub area of the game, Firelink Shrine, is hopeless. You know how Lordran and Lothric sound similar? Because after Dark Souls 1, if you link the first flame, a new kingdom began and rose Lothric. But now the time has come for Lothric to start dying. Firelink Shrine is a really old location and has been remodeled quite a bit due to erosion. After completing Irithyll, the Boreal Valley, you can head up some familiar looking territory. Head up a spinning mechanism that used in Dark Souls 1, and Then when you see the giant cathedral, you realize that you're in fucking Anor Londo. This is such a heavy scene in the game because it shows you that Anor Londo was never forgotten in Lothric, so they kept it. Aldrich, the Saint of the Deep, inhabits the holy place. Seeing Anor Londo like this was once a beautiful and bright place, now remains in the twilight you caused when you killed Guinevere, which is why Irithyll always remains dark even if you go to a place not far like Lothric Castle. Anor Londo is filled with enemies that will shred you. Aldrich put these enemies here even though they're just illusions like the one Gwendolyn used previously. This is so saddening to see, and when you enter the Chamber of the Princess, the room was desolate and disheartening. Knowing this is where you got the Lord Vessel, I don't understand why some people think this is just blind fan service, because it's not. It shows you that Lothric is a more fucked up Lordran. This works so well that it makes my head spin. For one, it shows you how much time has passed since the fall of Lordran as a place and the rise of Lothric, and the fall of Lothric. I don't think there should be a Dark Souls 4 because Dark Souls 3 finishes everything off so well. This is the final leg of the world. Much like Sean Bean, everything is fucking doomed. There are some people who don't like the way this game looks. I can understand people don't like how gray everything is, and I agree with them to a certain degree. Dark Souls 1 and 2 were certainly more colorful at that, and Dark Souls 3 feels a lot more lifeless, fitting for the game's themes, but it's not that visually striking. There are some beautiful areas to behold, and how everything seems to be set on fire adds a bit of color, but there's nothing in this game that compares to an area like Ash Lake that's beautiful and so grandiose. Yeah, Irithyll of the Boreal Valley is a nice looking place, but even that area lacked some color. I do wish this game had some more color, but the game still looks great. While the frame rate tries to maintain a relative 30 frames per second, it tends to tank tremendously. And for a game that's the fastest in the Souls series, not counting Bloodborne or Sekiro, Dark Souls 3 lags a shit ton, and that is fucking unacceptable. I can deal with 30 FPS, but as long as it's stable, you know? And don't rack me because I'm playing on an Xbox, because PS4 players have the same fucking issues. PC, you'll get a better frame rate if you have good specs, but Dark Souls 3 will tank with its frame rate. I think it's because of all the particle effects, which I think were a little over the top in this game, and they could have been toned down for better performance. Dark Souls 3 looks great, and the game's visual fidelity isn't sacrificed for better performance. The game actually looks this good. Again, Miyazaki wanting immersion rather than just a hard video game, which is what Dark Souls 2 did, and while the game did play smooth, the game was not very visually striking. Dark Souls 3 is a good looking game, not as good as looking as Dark Souls 1 when it comes to the style, but Dark Souls 3 still has some fantastic detail in the textures and enemies, specifically bosses. These bosses are so fucking awesome looking. I mean, I'll talk more about bosses when I get to them. One of the things Dark Souls 3 pulls off considerably well is the character creation. Oh my god, there are so many options here. I love it. Dark Souls 2 looked a bit too cartoonish with the character design and stuff, but here I was able to get my character created in no time. I like the way each of my characters look. I decided to name my character something goofy this time. There we go. John Goodman. Is there a reason I named him John Goodman?
Fucking reason.
So after creating my character, I began in the Cemetery of Ash. I didn't look like shit, I looked sexy as hell. But after killing Eodex Gundyr and arriving on the Firelink Shrine, your goal isn't explained, but your goal is to return all the lords to their thrones in Firelink Shrine. The Abyss Watchers, Yorm the Giant, Aldrich, the Devourer of Gods, and Prince Lothric. There is one Lord of Cinder still here, and he is Ludolith, the only passive Lord of Cinder. The Firekeeper is your means of leveling up instead of leveling up at the bonfire.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Seriously, I know Demon Souls did this, where you had a central hub disconnected from the entire game and you had to level up there, but this is fucking Dark Souls, not Demon Souls! You should be able to level up at bonfires like previously. Oh, Majula had the same fucking problem as Firelink Shrine, warping from the current location back to the hub to sit through a line of dialogue to level up. It also takes more souls to level up this time around. Okay, it's time to go look around for the first area. Oh wait, what's this? Bonfire warping up the start again. Okay, well, Dark Souls 2 did that, and... Are you fucking serious?
What the fuck is this?
Okay, now this just makes the game seem linear. Dark Souls 3 is by far the most linear game in the franchise. I don't hate this philosophy. After all, Metroid Prime 2 did something sort of similar, and I'll give it that. But Dark Souls 3 couldn't even transfer you organically through the environment. Dark Souls 2 may have been linear, but at least it transferred you organically through the environment. But here, in Dark Souls 3, the game forces you to warp to the first location. This just seems lazy that FromSoft couldn't get you to the Kingdom of Lothric in a funner, interesting way. Maybe put a boss in our path? I don't know. But this has no excuse for poor design. Oh well, it's not that big of a deal, but a little irritating. The whole game just seems to be a straight line with very little deviation. Yeah, the linear path makes sense, but I found this to be rather engaging. Dark Souls 1 had a rather disappointing second half and it wasn't consistent. Dark Souls 3 was a lot more consistent with a few optional areas off to the side, and they're all fantastic. The optional bosses may be a bit underwhelming. They are cool in theory. The optional areas are all fun to play through, and my favorite being Archdragon Peak. This area is absolutely brilliant, and the boss of the area is my second favorite in the game. More on that later, but these areas are brilliantly designed. Even though that they may be put in a linear order, let's talk about the level design in this game because it's fucking great. Level design in this game is top-notch. They may not fit together in a way like Dark Souls 1, but fuck me if these areas aren't memorable. They are all fun to play through, and every area has fantastic gameplay opportunities. Okay, that's mostly true. Yeah, I may be jumping the gun a bit here, but sometimes these areas can fuck right off! Oh yeah, areas like Firelink can just... Oh man, poison areas in the Souls series are a lot like taxes. They're not enjoyable, yet they're a fucking guarantee. Thanks to Modcracy for that joke, because it's absolutely true. Firelink is filled with so much obnoxious enemies, and the fact that the fucking toxic sludge slows you down to a fat roll. This is extremely aggravating when there are crazy enemies that will stop at nothing to murder your ass. Fuck the Firelink. Some of these areas were confusing to navigate at times. Some bits can feel a little samey, especially with areas like the Demon Ruins where it feels like a maze if you don't know where you're going. These areas aren't Metroid Prime 3 Skytown confusing, but these areas do get a little weird at times. But items are placed in places where they should be, and there are a lot of illusory walls this time around, and it feels good to troll people by leaving messages telling people to hit walls when there's nothing there. I love areas like Irithyll Dungeon. They are huge and terrifying. These areas give off a sense of grandiosity not seen in Dark Souls 2. It rivals that of the first game even. While some of the scenery in Dark Souls 1 was breathtaking, seeing a land far off in Dark Souls 3 is a lot more frequent. In the Road of Sacrifices, you can see Firelink below you if you stand looking over a railing, or that part in Smoldering Lake where you have to disable a giant ballista missile to stop from getting impaled by giant arrows, or where there's that giant worm in the Smoldering Lake.
Irithyll has called a big one! Again, it is the legend.
But areas like the Catacombs of Carthus can get fucked because this area is filled to the brim with skeletons, and this area has too many fucking enemies. They almost one-shot you, and the traps here are horrendous. Not all of these areas are bad, as I've said. Lothric Castle is by far my favorite, excluding the DLC areas. It's serene and gorgeous. The level is perfectly put together with the Grand Archives at the end of it, and I love the Grand Archives. It's so fucking fun to be traveling up really high to the tippy top of Lothric Castle. Hope you're not afraid of heights. But at the end of each area is what people really come to Dark Souls for. The bosses. Oh yeah, the bosses of Dark Souls 3 are a serious gameplay overhaul from the relatively challenging enemies in the first place. The game starts you off with Irithyll, who after dealing enough damage to will turn into a giant monster, and the first time I saw this I was like, oh my god, what do I do? But this is a nice surprise to new players. He's pretty challenging for an early fight, and when I find him more enjoyable than the first bosses of other games, but he is easy if you understand how telegraphing works. He telegraphs his attacks heavily, and when he's in his more dangerous form, he telegraphs his attacks really well so you have time to dodge. The next fight is Vort of the Boreal Valley, who is super fucking aggressive and is the first true wall of Dark Souls 3. Vort can frostbite you and he bum rushes you. I still like him though. His music is brilliant and he's such a fun fight. However, the Crystal Sage in the Road of Sacrifices can suck a fat one. He spawns a bunch of clones that use the same magic as him and you'll get butt fucked by soul spears and other shit. Also, his melee attacks are nearly impossible to dodge. I had so much trouble with the Crystal Sage on my first playthrough that I take this boss with a grain of salt. The Deacons of the Deep are so fucking easy, even though I dig their design. It forces you to kill one Deacon that's glowing, and once you kill him, the glowy stuff moves to another Deacon. But oh boy, the first Lord Soul boss is absolutely brilliant. The Abyss Watchers are fucking incredible. They're a gang boss for sure, which a little bit during the first one, another Abyss Watcher shows up. This forces you to avoid both of them, and just when you thought it couldn't get any better, the third Abyss Watcher shows up to attack the other ones. I love the fact that it's a boss that gives you a team member that you don't have to summon. A second phase of the Abyss Watchers is a lot like an Artorias battle from Dark Souls 1, but it's so fucking fun. This boss is absolutely brilliant, and it's really damn challenging. But the next boss in the Catacombs of Carthus is High Lord Wolnir. This boss can fucking die. He's so easy, but he's so fucking tedious to fight. You have to break the rings on his arms, and that's about it. This is such a disappointing Lord Soul boss fight, and I fucking hate him. In Irithyll of the Boreal Valley, the boss here is absolutely awesome. Pontiff Solivan is one of the Ornstein and Smo walls of Dark Souls, and he is so much fun to fight. He gave me a lot of shit since my weapon was weak, but I managed to solo kill him, and I was hit with an enormous wave of accomplishment. Yeah, he can be parried if you're good enough, but doing that requires you to be perfect. Pontiff is so cool, and his boss arena might be one of my favorites in the Souls series. His attacks are erratic, and when he summons a clone of himself, the fight gets even more stressful, but it's all the more awesome when you finally take him down. But the next Lord Soul fight is with Aldrich, and he's pretty fun to fight. His boss arena is more decayed version of Ornstein and Smo's arena. His attacks are a little tricky to dodge, but once you get behind him, it's all a matter of punishing little by little and running away to avoid his fucking arrows. Aldrich is pretty cool nonetheless. Yorm the Giant is disappointing much like Wolnir. The trick to killing him is using the Storm Ruler, but he is so easy to kill. Some of these Lord Soul bosses are disappointing. Some of the optional bosses are pretty dull. The old Demon King was more tedious than challenging. Seriously, fuck his attack patterns. But the Dual Princes in Lothric Castle is by far one of the coolest fights in the series. Lorien and Lothric are so much fun to fight. With unpredictable patterns, he is such a joy to fight. The arena is beautiful and is a totally fair fight. The music exemplifies this as well. Lorien and Lothric are so much fun to fight. They'll punish the impatient player, and their attacks punish you for not moving around a lot. But there is one boss I forgot to mention. The Nameless King. The Nameless King is my second favorite boss in the game. This boss is so awesome. Fun and engaging, it makes my head spin on how well it's designed. Nameless King is my favorite arena in the game. It's so beautiful. His first phase is on his dragon where the camera fucks itself, but once you kill the dragon, it's on to his second phase where you get a one-on-one duel with him, and it's so fun and exciting and... fuck. Well, when you try it again and... fuck me! Are you kidding me? Yeah! Fuck yeah! Woohoo! Oh yeah! Suck it, bitch! Oh man, this boss was fucking amazing. Nameless is relentless, but he is totally fair and is super fun to fight. My trick was staying to the right of him and punishing occasionally. You don't want to be impatient with this boss or he'll fucking wreck you. But when you finally beat him, it's so freaking satisfying. Nameless King is my second favorite boss in the game, and that goes without saying that he is one of the best bosses ever put into a video game. Perfectly balanced, as all things should be. Music! What about music in this game? Well, Dark Souls 3 has the best Souls soundtrack, like, ever. The main menu theme sounds like the final boss theme, but it's not! It's so epic and it gets you pumped up for the game. Even the first boss, the music has an epic feel to it, and when you find Champion Gundyr in the Dark World of the Cemetery of Ash, the music just has this feeling of, let's fucking go, dude! Shit, it gets even better with the Abyss Watchers. Their boss theme is so sad yet exciting and intense at the same time. Have a listen. The music is amazing! Firelink Shrine has a track that sounds hopeless and makes you sad when you see the world this fucked up, but the music gets even better when I talk about the final boss fight. Dark Souls 3 is the perfect game soundtrack and it's just incredible how many emotions each song can convey. The gameplay of Dark Souls 3 was ramped up to be even more aggressive and fast than ever before. FromSoft learned from their experiences with Bloodborne and how well the combat was received in that game, because Bloodborne was an absolute breath of fresh air from the slow, methodical combat of previous Souls games. Dark Souls 3 by far has my favorite gameplay in Souls. It's fast and can be approached in a way that it used to be approached, but Dark Souls 3 actually forces you to adjust your playstyle from Dark Souls 2. Yeah, there is still omnidirectional rolling, but now bosses are much more intense because they feel super fucking aggressive, and every fight seems to test your skills. This combat just isn't slow and methodical as previously, it's a lot more R1 spam focused. Enemies are faster, more aggressive, and have higher health pools. Staying to the right of enemies is a lot more important this time around, and enemies will shred your ass a new one. One-on-one enemy encounters are extremely rare, and large groups of enemies are also less frequent, but enemies are often found in groups of 3 or 4. This makes combat more intense, not only because your speed is balanced out with the enemy's speed, but because there are new ways to use weapons. You now have access to weapon arts, which makes your weapons more versatile. It eats up mana in the process. I rarely use these mechanics because they don't do a whole lot of damage, but some of them can be extremely deadly, like the Sellsword Twin Blades, which are absolutely rape everything in PvP. My weapons of choice during this playthrough were the Uji Katana, which is a very good early dexterity weapon. I upgraded it to do decent damage, but I eventually upgraded to the Black Knight Sword, which is by far my favorite weapon in the game. I eventually upgraded it to do over 300 fucking damage, which is insane, and not too many enemies or bosses lasted long with my eventual setup. I also got some use out of the Great Scythe, but only for PvP as it was kind of weak, but it destroyed everyone and everything in PvP, and I consider this weapon really good for PvP. There are some weapons I heavily enjoyed using, the Astora Greatsword being one of them, but I used that in my first playthrough because it did decent damage, but it's slow for me, and I'd rather use something else that swings faster. I'm not a fan of rapiers, as those weapons just seem a little unbalanced to me. There are some weapons in this game that can murder literally anyone and anything in just 1 or 2 strikes. The Ultra Greatsword is a good example of this. While I haven't been one-shotted by one yet, it has the potential to. PvP in this game felt really fun, even though I didn't do much of it, but sometimes combat in this game can feel a little samey since it's a lot of R1 spamming. A lot of people criticize Dark Souls 3 for this, and hey, they're not wrong, but the game is still fun as many of the other ones, so shut your mouth. They kept the Estus system from Dark Souls 2, where you have to find shards to increase its capacity, but now you can hold up to 15 Estus flasks, and shards aren't as difficult to find this time around. Also, the game starts you off with 3 Estus instead of 1. Also, drinking Estus flask is also really fast this time around, and you can move while doing it. Fucking finally! You burn undead bone shards to increase the power of your Estus flask, much like Firekeeper Souls or Sublime Bode Dust. Leveling up was fixed as well. No more adaptability stat this time around. Your invincibility frames are dependent on your equipment load this time again. Now that's more like it. The things that were broken in DS2 were corrected, and Dark Souls 3 feels much more balanced overall. After all that, after slaying every last lord in Lothric, the Firekeeper sends you to the source of Lothric, the Kiln of the First Flame, the very place where you ended your journey previously. After taking that short, silent journey, you get a look at the fallen kingdoms of Lothric. There are no enemies, and all that's left is a singular being, the soul of Cinder. It's time to lay the Lord of Cinder to rest. god. You're fighting yourself. You've become what you've sought out to destroy in the first place. It's time to lay Gwyn, the Lord of Cinder, to rest one final time. Once laying what was the chosen undead, and Lord Gwyn to rest. Do you find any answers? Probably not, but what you just experienced in the world of Dark Souls, after overcoming everything in Lordran, Drangleic, and Lothric, the only thing you get is the continuation of the cycle. You become the Lord of Cinder, and you take the role you've taken before, a duel with yourself, ending with you becoming the very thing you destroyed. Seems a little worthless, doesn't it? After all that work, life is just gonna repeat itself? That was the message I got from Dark Souls 3. Is that, well, life just keeps repeating itself. Dark Souls 3 is the best work From Software has ever done. It exceeded my expectations, and then some. Dark Souls 3 may be considered uninspired by some Souls fans, but to me, Dark Souls 3 is the perfect video game. Dark Souls as a franchise is absolutely breathtaking, and I would recommend these games to anyone, casual or hardcore. Dark Souls is a game that will teach you how to never give up, and I adore it for that reason. Dark Souls 3 is one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. It's nearly perfect in every single way. I doubt anything will ever come along like this again. Dark Souls 3 is the best Souls game ever. Dark Souls 3 is one of my favorite video games of all time, and pushes the first Dark Souls game off the decade throne, and it takes its rightful spot. What a perfect conclusion to the franchise, right? Hey everybody, Skeptical Rowan here. What next? Well, you'll just have to wait and find out. Thank you so much for watching my Dark Souls videos. It was a lot of fun making these, and it was also a fuck ton of work. Make sure you click the like button, or click the dislike button, and let me know why you disliked it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe, or don't subscribe if you don't want to see any more. If you're already subscribed, be sure to click the bell notifications so you get notified every time I post a new video. So, please share these videos around so I can get more exposure. This has been Skeptical Rowan. Thank you all for watching. Peace out.